Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is the Our Turf Football Podcast. I am Dana. Joining me is Lisa and Kate, as they always are. And we have a very special guest. Our guest, Bill Alvstad. I say that correctly, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, I love it when I get it right. So he's going to join us he is from Hawks Playbook. You've seen him all over Seahawks Twitter. He is the guru of all. He's fantastic when it comes to Seahawks information, because tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is our NFC West Breakdown. Now, as most of you know that have been watching, we are breaking down each individual division, going through how they did last season, how they're doing now, what their offseason has looked like, their draft, just to kind of regroup after kind of a nutty offseason for most football teams. So we're just kind of regrouping before we go into OTAs and all that other stuff that happen in the boring part of the football year, because football never stops. But so we just wanted to make sure we have our finger on the pulse of what is going on with each team. And tonight it is the NFC West. So this show goes very fast, and so we're going to go ahead and just roll into it. We're not going to do some fun little introduction. We're just going to dive head first because, well, between Bill and I, we could take up the whole half hour, right? About
That's true.
So, but we got 4 teams to cover, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello to everyone who's joining us on YouTube in our live chat. Go ahead, feel free, ask your questions, join in the conversation. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We're actually going to start with the San Francisco 49ers. Now, I was so thrilled when Kate said that she would take the 49ers to look this over, because they are the thorn in the side of many Seahawks fans. But the 49ers, even outside of their quarterback controversy, they've kind of had an interesting offseason, Kate.
I don't know that I'd call it interesting. It's a lot of things. You know, they were this close to get into the Super Bowl. They took care of Dallas right at the end of the year in the playoffs. They upset the Packers. They had the lead going into the fourth quarter of that NFC Championship game before they just completely collapsed to the Rams. And, you know, it was shades of 2019, right, when they did the same thing with the Chiefs. So it really opened the door for a lot of Jimmy Garoppolo questions. And when you've got a number 3 overall draft pick at quarterback sitting, you know, Trey Lance sitting on the bench, it's opening the door for that kind of controversy and those kind of complaints and things. You know, they're bringing back, you know, George Kittle and some of the standard people to their lineup. The rest of the people they signed, you know, they weren't big names, they weren't splashy names, they weren't, you know, they weren't fantasy football names. The draft, really, I thought they did a nice job. They didn't have a first round pick, so they had to wait till the second round, and they did a lot to shore up their linebackers, offensive tackles, pulled a couple offensive tackles, and even the corner. They got one of my favorite corners in the draft was Tariq Castro-Fields out of Penn State. They ended up picking up him in the 6th round, and they grabbed another quarterback, Brock Purdy, in the 7th from Iowa State.
Because
it's almost like they're begging to have some kind of a, you know, quarterback shootout in training camp this season. I think Jimmy's job is legit up for grabs, and I think Trey Lance has a very good job of taking that job for him. They have just underperformed, and you know, these clutch losses, if you want to call it that, you know, that those are not acceptable. Titans fans are making the same kind of complaints about their quarterback. He can't win the big game, and now that's starting to be the rep with Jimmy. So yeah, I don't know who's going to be under center week 1, but I bet it's not the same guy that's under center week 7.
Oh. That is true. So the 49ers were 10-7. They actually ended up 3rd in the division last year, behind the Cardinals, who we're going to talk about. I don't know how I didn't realize, being a representative of this division, that the Cardinals went ahead of the 49ers in the rank. It's bizarre to me. But, you know, it's interesting with San Francisco because we keep waiting, right? They keep playing. Either they have disastrous years where they have a zillion injuries, then they win 4 games. Or they have these years where they play really well but just can't finish. Bill, I'm going to ask you, when you look at the San Francisco 49ers, outside of the quarterback controversy, what do you feel that team's identity is? Because I really struggle with it sometimes.
Well, I think you still look at the defensive line there. They're really strong there along the defensive line. And then their offense is not anemic. They did, I think, make a mistake in losing Laken Tomlinson at guard there, and really didn't replace him with much. And I thought in the draft it was a little anemic. Some people liked their draft. I think Drake Jackson with their first pick, 61 overall, was great. I think he's going to end up being a great player for them. But I thought they got a little weaker this year, and they finished third last year. You mentioned 10, but they made it all the way to the conference final, and they just feel like they backed in. And so I'm not exactly sure where they're at. I think if you're to a San Francisco 49er fan or a diehard, they're going to say they're going to be okay. But really, you told me to take the quarterback situation out of the equation, and you just can't. It's just sitting right there. Jimmy Garoppolo, they still have him. I think they misplayed that a little bit in the offseason, that equation. I think they could have probably gotten something for him right before the draft, and now he's there. He's on the team. I think the team actually feels more comfortable with him over Trey Lance, and probably go into the season starting him and just kind of eke out some games. Obviously, he's been able to do that over a period of time, and I think it's not a great look. I mean, you mentioned the first round draft pick for Trey Lance at 3 overall. In addition to that, you spent 3 first round picks to go up and get him. So that draft capital there is just a huge investment. I'm just not exactly sure what's happening.
Lisa, you love quarterbacks, and you that's kind of, your specialty. We see a lot of rumors that say that the 49ers, they're not in love with Trey Lance, even though they went up and got him, but they just are now not happy with what they see. But obviously the brass isn't thrilled with Jimmy Garoppolo either. Although I think Bill is right. I think the team is pretty pro Jimmy. And then they brought in another quarterback. Now that's practice squad quarterback, whatever you want to say. I mean, it is what it is. But how do you see this playing out?
Well, I think what you do is, I think them not moving Garoppolo, like Bill said, I think that speaks volumes, huge volumes. I think that, like you said, I think you could have got something for him. The fact that you didn't explore, I'm sure you explored options, but the fact that you didn't pull the trigger on any, there's obviously doubt with Trey Lance's abilities. So somebody saw something they didn't like. I think it's going to carry over into preseason. You're going to see a full-scale quarterback battle to me. I think each quarterback brings their own set. I think, with Jimmy, he got the experience. Trey obviously is going to have the mobility. So it's kind of which way. And either with this offense, with Mike McDaniels down here now in Miami, I think you're going to see the same thing you saw that he told us is you're going to have yards after catch. You're going to have short passes. You're going to have, I think both quarterbacks can do that. But I'm kind of like leaning with Bill. I think the writing is on the wall for Trey. Something's not gelling with them. They're not completely sold on him. My gut instinct says you're going to see Jimmy Garoppolo starting game 1. So I think Trey will be a backup.
I can't get over how bad of a look that will be. Like, you spent
just
all
a miss.
This,
it's just a miss. I mean,
that's fair. It was a miss. Maybe.
I don't know. I mean, Jimmy's still not 100% after that shoulder injury, and he's due $25 million. I think that played into the kind of offers they got, if they got any. I'm more curious on the defensive side of the ball. They gave Nick Bosa his 5th-year option. D Ford has played like 5 games in the last 2 years. Is he going to be healthy? Is he going to play and contribute this year? I mean, he could be, that final thing to get that defense where it needs to be. And I don't know.
And where is Debo?
Stuff.
Where's Debo's mentality right now? That's kind of another big question. Where's his head going to be at the start of the season?
Yeah, he's somewhere between AJ Brown and George Kittle.
Somewhere
my
there.
Mental state.
Lisa did bring up another interesting point, as over the last 2 seasons, the San Francisco 49ers have lost one of their coordinators. They lost defensive coordinator Saleh. He was now the head coach of the Jets, which still I will keep crowing that I love that draft from the Jets. And then they've lost their offensive coordinator. last year you could feel a slight difference in the defense. I'm wondering how much we'll feel of a difference this year in the offense too. That could be really interesting. The funny thing is, see, Bill, you mentioned that you don't think they got better. You think they're about the same where they were. I don't know, because I never really felt like I had a good grasp on them last year either. You know what I mean?
I didn't think that they were going to be good last year, and they ended up winning 10 games.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought they would go through the growth situation with Trey Lance. So I thought that, it would take a little bit of time to integrate him. I thought maybe they would be a better second half game as opposed to the front half. Turned out Jimmy Garoppolo took the job, never let it go, and he stayed healthy. I'm sure that's probably going to be okay heading into this year. But I heard from a credible source that on the Trey Lance thing that Shanahan just doesn't trust him and just does not expect him to know the play after a year and a half now in the system to operate and run the offense the way that they'd like to be able to, and the Garoppolo to be able to do it, even if his ceiling is much lower.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see the mentality of the team going into this season. I think that it could be really, it'll be an interesting battle. I think that's one preseason I actually will pay attention to this year for sure.
It's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
Have they hired a replacement offensive coordinator, or is Shanahan just going to do that?
Well, I mean, they can hire someone. Shanahan's still going to do it, but I think they did. I think
Chris Forrester and Bobby Schloek are share those duties, but Kyle Shanahan draws up all the stuff pre-week.
Yeah, so if you have 3 coordinators, you don't have any.
Fair enough.
That's actually that about running backs too. So I guess it's the same kind of thing.
Right.
Very well, fair. Yeah. All right, let's move on to the Cardinals now. So this is a team. And I say this with all the love in my heart. So, this team is one of the most boring teams in the NFL. And that's not always a bad thing. Like that can be a good thing, which means they're not having player drama. They're not having, coaching drama. They're not having big swings. They're not having little swings. They're not doing anything, but they still managed to win 11 games, right? They have Kyler Murray, who this was the first blip. I was like, oh, the Cardinals have some drama. I didn't even know what to do with myself. Kyler Murray then this offseason basically wants a new contract. There's speculation he will not play without a new contract. Question comes in, what kind of contract do you get him? And that'll be a conversation for another time. But so that's really the only issue that has popped up. I think at the end of last season, there was some conversation about Cliff Kingsbury and whether or not he was on the hot seat. Should he keep his job? They were winning all these games, but they cannot finish the season for the life of them. And so, was he, going to be the guy that could do this? Then there was questions about Kyler Murray. Is Kyler Murray the quarterback you need him to be? He's just kind of a shorter running quarterback. We know that they usually don't have long life in the NFL, usually. But so I think that, there was a little bit of drama, but for the most part, this team's a little ho-hum until you go and start to look at the people that they lost this year in free agency. So I went back and looked, and it's like, they picked up, let me see, Will Hernandez, guard out of New York from the Giants. Okay, that's pretty good. They need to buff up that line a little bit. They re-signed a handful of players. They got Nick Vigil from Minnesota. But these are the names that they lost. Christian Kirk, Chandler Jones, Chase Edmonds, Jordan Hicks, Jordan Phillips. They managed to get AJ Green for one more year. So that is some significant talent that left that team this year. And there's still a handful that haven't been picked up. We'll see if they re-sign them at this point or not. But then you look at their draft. So they did have, I think it was 8 picks in the draft. They picked up not a first-round pick, started in second round. I think the Seahawks were the only NFC West team to have a first-round pick this year, if I remember correctly. And so they started in the second round at pick 55. They picked up Trey McBride, tight end out of Colorado State. They got a linebacker, an edge rusher, a running back, a couple of guards. They seemed to lean a little. It was just all about the lines for these guys. They didn't pick up a wide receiver. They didn't pick up any of the flashy players, although I have heard a lot of good things about this tight end out of Colorado State. What this offseason for me looked like for the Cardinals was about the same as they do every year. There wasn't a major push for we need one player to get past that hump. We need one move to get us over the edge here and get on to finishing the season better. Obviously, JJ Watt is still there. I love JJ Watt, but the man cannot stay on the field. And so, he's of no help to them at all. They still have, some solid, good players, some really good players, but they just can't finish. And I didn't see anything in the offseason to change that. They ended up second place in the NFC West last year, 11 wins, 6 losses. And again, did you know that? Like, I didn't even realize.
They lost 4 of their last 5 games.
Yeah.
And that's consistency issues. Kyler Murray missed those 3 games in the middle. And they got very lucky to win 2 of those 3 games because they've got enough supporting staff. They've got enough of a complete team to get them through those kind of rough patches, but they completely lack consistency at the end of the year. I don't know what I don't want to play the schedule game with them because I have no idea which team's going to show up.
Yeah. And Katie just brought up again, and I did forget to mention this, that Hopkins will be suspended. He's out for 6 games, I believe that he is. So he will be of no help to them at the beginning of the season. Hope maybe he'll be the spark they need in the afterwards. Bill, when I look at this, when I see divisional play, I rarely expect the Cardinals to beat the Rams. I don't expect them to beat the 49ers. They beat Seattle if Colt McCoy is playing quarterback. That's the only way, as long as Kyler Murray.
And if they're playing in Seattle.
Yeah, if they play in Seattle. But this team, even though they won 11 games, never feels like a threat to me. And is that just bias on my part, or is that kind of the gist of it?
Well, it's crazy. The past 2 years, they've started like gangfire. I mean, Kyler Murray was in the MVP conversation through week 10, got hurt, never really regained that. The team limped into the playoffs at 11 wins, got soundly beat at the end of the year by the Seattle Seahawks at home when the game was on the line for positioning, and they just kind of rolled over for that game. And you mentioned everything in the offseason. It just seems like they're going in circles. Yeah. Like there's no real ascending. There's no descending. It's just kind of like we're just hovering. And you would expect with Kyler Murray and company there, they've got enough of a roster. There's enough to work with there where they are just 1 or 2 pieces away, probably in a couple of key spots where they could make a legitimate run. They're facing in their own division. They've got a couple of teams in front of them, I think, that are really hard to make it difficult to get seeding and to get an advantage in the playoffs. But they're right there. So you would think that, in addition to just re-signing Zach Ertz and James Conner, they would go out and make a really nice splash move. And you mentioned they lost Chandler Jones. They lost Jordan Hicks, their leading tackler. Christian Kirk left on an absurd contract, so I'm not going to nail him for that. They also lost Chase Edmonds, their second-tier running back, who was on the field 46% of their plays. So, and they didn't really go out and try to replace that. They did get trade with Marquise Brown. I thought that was a good move in light of the fact that DeAndre Hopkins is now going to be suspended. That was fortuitous for them. But I don't know if I see them any better than the 3rd seed in the division now. They won 11 games last year. They were better than the 49ers throughout the entire season, but they just seem like they just either fell back a little bit or stayed about the same. And the way that Kingsbury coaches and the kind of commotion that's going on with Kyler Murray, do you expect them to be any better than the 3rd seed out of this division this year?
It will depend.
I don't. Depend on what, Lisa?
It'll depend on, there's a certain situation, a certain rumor mills that are going around right now. And you take the Kyler Murray situation, he hasn't shown up for voluntary things, which is, okay, but it's voluntary. But still, you still think that, part of you would like to see your quarterback there, right? To kind of, mend fences, shall I say? I mean, there's obviously some turmoil going on with his contract. There's the Drew Brees situation is going to start coming up, because if you look at the situation with Drew Brees at 43 years old, it's going to be a situation that if a team talks to him, Arizona was hot on this kid's was hot on Brees' tail 2 years ago, and he turned him down to return to New Orleans. And so was Seattle, from what I hear. I heard Seattle was kind of quoting him. So you look at a team that, like you said, could not be, but might be just a player or two away from what they want. So what will you do with Murray? Ship Murray off Carolina? I don't know. It could be an interesting situation if Brees comes back and says he wants to play.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that Drew Brees will play again. I think he was just kind of quipping that. I don't have a lot of faith in that.
I think he's pissed off. I think he's
pissed off too. We got fired.
I think he's pissed off at the league. He's like, well, I'll just come back.
Right. That's so true. I look at it this way though, Kate. She brings up a good point. So you ship off Kyler Murray before you have to give him a new contract. But in my opinion, and from the Cardinals fans that I have been following and watching, and the reporters, I think the fans have more faith in Kyler than they necessarily do in Cliff.
Agreed. But I think they're losing their patience with him, not showing up for voluntary workouts. He's your quarterback. He's the leader of your team. He's supposed to be there doing that. And his whole, he's still on his rookie deal. I want to renegotiate my contract. Dude, suck it up and finish your rookie contract just like everyone else has to do. I don't know. I'm struggling with them Oklahoma quarterbacks. I got my own issues here. So,
Kate, I think that they brought in Marquise Brown to just kind of help solve that issue for Kyler. I think that the maturity issue is there. They went out and got a college playmaker for him that he's comfortable with, that might help him come back into camp and just kind of placate that whole situation. I really think that's exactly what they try to do. We'll see if it works. I think it will. This stuff happens in the offseason. I think his agent overplayed his hand a little bit there, during the draft period where, there was a ton of movement this offseason with quarterbacks and wide receivers and all that stuff. And they just need to bring it back down a little bit, get to camp, and then I think everything's going to be fine. I just don't know if the Cardinals are ready. Last year I on my show, I had a conversation with Keith, my podcast co-host, about the Cardinals. And I was I think they're ready, Keith. I think the Cardinals are set. They've got the roster. They've got the coaching. They've got the quarterback. He's ready to go now. They came out like gang fire at the beginning of the year. And I was like, God, I'm right. They're ready to go. And then boom. And Keith was like, I told you, don't get too high on this team and Kingsbury, because they're just ready to fall off the cliff at any moment.
Yeah.
I was completely high on them last year.
No pun intended.
I picked them to win the division. I was high. And even as they're on that winning streak to start the year, Dana and Lisa and Sonia are all like, it's not going to last. It's not going to last. And they were right. It didn't. I think
Murray should have signed in baseball. He's not going to be anything.
Yeah, we'll see.
He's done.
I will say Kate was right about the Raiders, though. All of us laughed at Kate about the Raiders doing well last year, and she was right. So we give you that.
Oh, man, talk about adversity. That team went through it, right?
Right, for sure. Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the Seattle Seahawks. Big breath, Bill. We're going to take a big breath for this one. So the Seahawks, Bill. So there's been a few changes in the offseason, as many of you know. They traded their quarterback, Russell Wilson, to the Denver Broncos. They went ahead and let Bobby Wagner pick his new team. That's the way I look at it. I look at it as they did not cut him. They said, Bobby, we're going to let you go pick your new team. It was a nice thing. And Bobby's not at all bitter about the whole thing. But he is now with the Rams, which just kills at this point. But interesting what the Seahawks got. They did get in return a pile of draft picks. We talked about this right after the draft. We had a whole conversation about Russell Wilson right afterwards. And so this is kind of where I'm at. And Bill, I'm going to turn a lot of this over to you because I really want your opinions on some of these things. I think, in my opinion, go ahead, people, chop my head off now. What they did with Russell Wilson was very smart. I know Lisa disagrees, but I think it was very smart. Russell was not going to stay in Seattle. He wanted to be traded. He was not going to sign another contract. Get what you can out of him. And they knew that. We as fans did not know that. We as podcasters didn't know that. We knew he wanted to be traded, but we thought it'd be one more year-ish or so. Bobby was a little more of a surprise. But I like what they did with the draft picks. I like the way that this feels a lot like the 2011 team. I am not as low on this team as a lot of other people. So, Bill, first, give me your impression about the whole Russell Wilson, Bobby Wagner situation, and then kind of how you felt about the draft.
Well, Dana, I'll have to say that I agree with you. I'm not as low as some people are on the team, and I'll try to build up to that, I guess.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
The Russell Wilson thing, I think, was inevitable in retrospect. I think when we were in it, it was hard to see because they were being quiet. Russell was saying all the right things. Pete was saying all the right things. They ended the last year like that as well. They kind of built it back. You thought they were going to run it back. They came out of the winter meeting with the owner, Jody Allen, and it looked like all things were go to run the entire thing back at least one more year. And I was like, it makes sense. It's not going to be perfect. Nobody's going to be happy with that, but here we go. And then a couple weeks later, boom, this thing just kind of happened really quick. And Denver was in play. It turned out the entire time they'd been in conversations for a month about shipping Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos for picks and players, and it happened. And you'd mentioned the idea that you were okay with it, and it was kind of inevitable, and they got the best that they could do. And I agree with all of that. I think that anytime you have a situation where you're shipping out a franchise quarterback, you're going to be on the losing end. You just are. And especially Russell Wilson. I think he's at the top of his game still. He's 34 years old. I think he's got at least 6 more years left.
Oh, really? Okay.
I do. I think the injury kind of screwed things up for him, but I think he's still at that top level right now. And I think the way that he works out in the offseason and keeps his body in condition, keeps his mind squared away, I do believe that he's going to be the viable quarterback for quite a while. But with all that said, let's get back to exactly what they got. So they got players, Noah Fant, a really good young tight end, Shelby Harris, a defensive lineman, and Drew Lock, this quarterback that was just kind of a throw-in, as fans would think. Pete Carroll, though, is selling it as something more than that. I'm not exactly sure how to take that. And then they went out and so they got 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and a third or fourth or something like that. And I thought the draft went well. I think the whole offseason, when you take a look at the free agency, who they let go, some of the aged players, some of the players that had some bigger contracts or would have needed to have been signed to bigger contracts, it shows that they are getting back to their roots. They're getting back to team building, young, fast players, hungry. I thought the draft showed that. I thought free agency showed that. And it does remind me of 2011. Dana, that's a perfect example where we went in with Tavares Jackson at quarterback. We were in between Hasselbeck and Russell Wilson. And I think that's exactly where they're at with this roster. They're trying to build the roster around a future quarterback that's not on the team right now. They're saying all the right things about Drew Lock, propping him up as they should. He's a young quarterback. They do want to see him compete. I believe that. Geno Smith is there. He's kind of shown us who he is, what he's about. I think Pete favors Geno Smith in that Geno takes care of the ball. He completes nearly 70% of his passes last year. He was a 5 touchdown to 1 interception ratio in the games that he did play. He didn't look good in a couple of those games. But the whole entire team didn't look good. There was a lot of stuff going on. The offensive line was really porous. He took a ton of sacks, but he looked really good in that last game, I think. But again, I think it was against the Jaguars, so who knows? But my point is, we had this show yesterday about the quarterback position group on my Seahawks podcast, and we just basically both came to the conclusions that this is going to be a rough year. We'd like to take the upside on Drew Lock and see where that takes us. And maybe he surprises. Maybe he completes 67% of his passes and he runs this point guard offense like Pete Carroll wants to. They don't turn the ball over. The defense ends up being better than we think. Maybe the 2 offensive tackles integrate better, and Austin Blythe at center makes that offensive line cohesion just something extra. And we go win 9 games or 10 games. And all of a sudden, we don't need a franchise quarterback anymore because we got this placeholder guy that seems to be doing okay, managing the team and the ball. We can invest in all the other position groups and kind of win with defense, win with the running game, and with a point guard quarterback, as Jimmy Garoppolo does, as Jared Goff did for the Rams. And there's many teams like that are out there that kind of win that way. And I think that's what Pete wants to do. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Lisa and Kate, I'm going to get your opinions on this too. There are people out there who are like, oh, we're going to tank this year, tank for this quarterback or that
Pete's
quarterback.
not tanking for
That's
anybody.
just it. I'm like, have you never even heard of Pete Carroll? Pete Carroll doesn't understand what the word tank means, right? Like that is not something that's in his blood. But at the same time, he's not stupid. He knows what he has in front of him. And I think that they are willing to accept a 5-win season in order to get the guy that they want next year. They are going to get this line rock solid. They're going to get this defense rocking.
I agree with that.
And I agree. And that the quarterback situation is what it is. And they were willing to take a year to take a breath to say, okay, Geno probably could win you 6 games. I have no question that Geno Smith, looking at who we had Seahawks play this year, that Geno could win 6 games, especially with the full offseason and all of the focus being on him instead of just being a backup. But I think what most people don't understand is that I think Seahawks fans are okay knowing that they're not going to win this year. There's those fans. Oh, we're going to win 10 games. No, we're not, baby. It's just not going to happen. Just it's okay. But that's okay if you can see the big picture, and not everyone can see the big picture.
Yeah, and they took a pass. They took a hard pass on this quarterback class out of this draft. And it told you everything you needed to know about their strategy.
Yep.
And it points to exactly what you just said.
Y'all are going to be watching a lot of Ohio State and Alabama football this fall.
Apparently so. Yeah, that's what I've been told.
Right.
So that was my next question. Lisa and Kate, you guys are big college football fans. You watch a lot of college football. Who are the 2 quarterbacks maybe Seahawks fans could keep their eyes on, or a handful of them? Because I've heard, rumor has it, there's a bunch of them that are going to be Hall of Famers next year. Hall of Famers.
Hall of Famers. Wow.
That's what I keep saying. Oh, there's 3 Hall of Famers coming out of the next year's class. Whatever. Quarterbacks.
Yeah. I've seen too many really good quarterbacks come out of Ohio State that do not translate to the NFL. So I wouldn't call C.J. Stroud a Hall of Famer. But I mean, that the 2 easy choices are Bryce Young out of Alabama and C.J. Stroud out of Ohio State. Because they've got some time under their belts.
Especially Bryce Young.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it just depends on what kind of football you want to play, because they are both going to play 2 very different styles of football. And so just keep an eye on their offenses this year if you want to see which way, Seattle's going to lean, and look at whose offense is more like what you guys want to run there.
Mm-hmm.
I'll throw a wild card name in there too. Will Levin's out of Kentucky. I think that he's a big arm quarterback, 6'3", 232 pounds. He's going to have some stats this year that are going to blow people away, and I think he's going to end up elevating and being in that conversation.
But it's still an SEC school.
I can't draft anybody from Kentucky that's a basketball school.
I know. I'm just letting you know he's gonna be a riser that nobody's really talking about right now. I think C.J. Stroud would entice Seattle more than Bryce Young. Bryce Young is, barely 6 foot and 185 pounds or something.
I'm over that, Bill. I'm over it. And people have called me on it. I don't even care. No. I'm over. I want a tall quarterback, and that is no shade to Russell Wilson. I just want something different. We had 10 years of not being able to throw across the middle and having to scramble. It was so fun to watch, and I appreciate everything he did. I just want something different. I want someone who can make those. And that's, I think, why people got excited about Geno in that Jaguars game, because he was hitting the people in the middle. We hadn't seen it in 10 years.
And everyone just kind of thought that we were going to draft the Liberty quarterback, Malik Willis, because he was going to be Russell Wilson light. And, I think Pete does want to move away from that a little bit and get more of a traditional point guard style quarterback.
Okay, one more quick question, and then I swear we're going to move on to the Rams. There was a lot of hullabaloo, Bill, about the Seahawks drafting that running back in the 2nd round. What were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you draft a running back in this day and age in the 2nd round, people are going to look at that. You can also look at the fact that the most successful running backs in the last 10 years are drafted in the 1st and 2nd rounds in the NFL. And I think the way that Seattle wants to manage its running game, prioritize its effectiveness, not necessarily running the most in the NFL. I don't know that that's necessarily been Pete Carroll's MO since he's been here, but when he wants to run the ball, he wants to run the ball effectively. Mm-hmm. He wants to be the best at it, and I don't blame him. If you're going to have that philosophy, go out and do it right. So I think that's what they're trying to do with this draft pick, and I'm not a hater Is it early?
I loved it.
Yeah, I don't know. They went out and drafted an edge player right before that. They drafted the trench guy in the first round. Okay, now you go get your position player star at running back, and I'm okay with that. He wouldn't have been available later. Other options later on were not going to be as effective as that pick. The Kenneth Walker pick is a great pick.
I told the story a couple weeks ago, and after I came back from the draft, that when Seattle picked him, everyone around me was so excited, and there was not another Seahawks fan around me, and they're like, "That is the best running back in the draft. You guys just nailed it." And I was like, "Okay, well, I'm going to have to argue with all these Seahawks."
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where you're going to argue with people about the pick, but you're not going to argue about the player once he's on the field.
He's fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. All right, so let's move on to I'm just going to put this up here because Katie's so nice. So Katie put in a question. She's like, "Have you all heard about the weird Lamar Jackson stories bubbling up about him coming to Seattle?" I can't even wrap my brain around the Ravens getting rid of Lamar Jackson. I can't.
Well, you better.
Why?
It's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Why?
I don't know. Something's going on because there's rumblings everywhere. I'm hearing it from people that are pretty close to Lamar that there's going to be, he's going to command a lot of money.
Oh,
so
I don't want to pay.
I'm serious. I would watch a lot of the rumblings. A lot of the rumblings are having coming down to the Dolphins after the 2 a year this year. I mean, there's going to be some issues. I don't know. It's going to be, I got 50-50 next year that he's still with the Ravens.
It's fair. I will tell you this. I don't think Seattle wants to pay that big of a contract. No. They want a rookie.
Well, they already proved it. Got rid of a franchise quarterback.
Yes, we
did. He still runs too much. He's going to get hurt. It's definitely the amount of damage he's taking now is going to come off the end of his career.
80% of his passes he completes from the pocket. The stats are crazy.
Right.
It's like
he has absolutely improved, but I don't know that he's going anywhere.
We're going to save that conversation for that division. That's what we're going to do. All right, so let's go on to the Rams. The Rams, obviously reigning Super Bowl champions. I promised our friend Derek, Mr. Sondi, that I would throw that in there. They are the reigning Super Bowl champions. He is very excited. The interesting thing about this, and Lisa's going to go through the Ram stuff with us, but Lisa, the interesting thing about this team for me is that they are of the new philosophy that, and I said this last week and I got some flack on Twitter about it, but I'm going to say it again. They are the Yankees of the NFL. They buy their team, right? I get it. They buy their team. They get these big players, these huge contracts. It's not, I don't have a problem with it. It's just what it is, right? And so instead of building through the draft, because F them picks, according to their general manager. So they go out and they get free agents. How was this offseason for them? Because usually post Super Bowl, it's a little hard on teams.
Well, I think what they did, and when you look at their roster of everything that they needed to do, they did. This draft to me was more of about developmental players, because when you look at what's their weakest point, when you look at the free agents, they lost Von Miller. Okay, well, you have to plug that because that's their weak part right now, because that takes pressure off Aaron Donald. That takes off pressure there. So what do? They go out and get Bobby Wagner to fill that role. Then what I thought, now this is where I'm going to go with the Rams on Sean McVay of this year's draft, is they went and got this kid, Daniel Hardy from Montana State, and drafted him. This kid is outstanding.
Yes, he is.
I watched this kid at Senior Bowl. Let me tell you something. You sit this kid behind Bobby Wagner, they set themselves up pretty nice at the outside linebacker situation. So, and then they went and got themselves a nice little cornerback, Jacoby Durant. He's going to sit behind Jalen Ramsey. I mean, so to me, and then of course they locked up Matthew Stafford with that huge contract. My only thing with them is in the running back position. I just don't, I don't know about Cam Akers. Some of these guys, I'm like, I had to look up because I'm like, okay, wait a minute. They don't have that sexy name at running back. Mm-hmm. So, Cooper Kupp, what can you say? Every year the kid's a Pro Bowler. Every year.
Oh, girl, you just jinxed him. He is getting hurt this year.
I know, right?
That is on you now.
I'm going to write myself a note to not draft him in the first round of our fantasy football draft.
You can. This kid's got great. Allen Robinson. They went and picked up Allen Robinson to take it.
That's a good pickup.
And yeah, it's a good pickup. I mean, the only thing right now is Odell. I mean, there's a situation with Odell Beckham right now. Just don't know what's going to happen there. So, because they lost Robert Woods to the Titans, because that would have been a fun trio if Robert would have stayed, and then it wouldn't put so much pressure. But I think that, I just kind of feel that Odell will get back with them. Mm-hmm. So, because like I said, that, he won a Super Bowl, Kate. I'm sorry. He did, I think he's going to kind of see it again. So I just don't know if Odell will get the money, unless it's a training camp thing, like you guys said, and goes in some, one of the team's players gets hurt and they give him a lot of money. So, I mean, I kind of thought with the Cardinals when Hopkins got hurt, I thought he might look Arizona's way. Then Des Bryant came out and was, tweeting about Arizona. So, but I think the Rams are in great position to me to defend that Super Bowl champ, especially when you got Aaron Donald, and look for this kid Daniel Hardy, guys, because he's going to make some noise. So.
Well, I thought it was interesting with their 8 draft picks, 4 of them were defensive backs.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Half of it, shoring up and adding depth to that defense was really smart.
Have you seen them do that? Like you say, you always go out and sign those sexy big names, but yeah, you got some big name players, but you've got some developmental players that are coming up behind them.
Well, now we just need to see if they can actually develop those players though, right? Because they always go after these big name free agents. And so it's kind of like the way I feel about the Broncos. They have no idea how to develop a quarterback. And so they keep having to go out and get quarterbacks that are already established. That's fine. It works for them.
The nice thing about the Rams is they can develop them. They do have the time. They have the roster. They have got a very deep roster.
Got a big roster.
Lisa, you mentioned the Matthew Stafford extension. I think that's underrated. You didn't really hear about it very much, but that's a huge signing for the Rams to be able to get him locked in. And then Joseph Noteboom re-signed at left tackle after Andrew Whitworth retired. That's a huge little thing that you don't even think about really. Mm-hmm. Who else? They lost Sonny Michel, but they drafted a kid in the draft, the kid from Notre Dame, Kyron Williams, I think is an underrated running back. So they really didn't lose there. You mentioned Cam Akers. You're not quite sure about Cam Akers. Well, that's because he had the ACL. He missed almost the entire year last year. Mm-hmm. He's a tremendous running back for them. Kind of reminds you of Steven Jackson for them, a dozen years ago. Bobby Wagner, Allen Robinson, Troy Hill, they picked up on a trade from the Browns to get him back after he left in free agency the year prior. I thought it's a great move. This is one of those deals where Los Angeles is an already ready-made roster that just needs to tweak things to get back to where they were. They're easily the first or second most talented roster in the NFL right now.
I think definitely defend. I think they'll be there in the end for sure.
I think so too, unless the injury bug hits them or something nasty goes on. Yeah. Like I said, I think if they lose Cooper Kupp, that's probably I think they could lose Aaron Donald and still do well to an injury. But if they lost Kupp, I'm not sure.
Both those players would be nasty.
They didn't do anything for their receiving corps. They didn't draft anybody who can catch a ball.
Right.
So they must be happy with what they've got.
Yeah.
Well, they got to be. Well, there wasn't by that time they drafted. Healthy. By the time they drafted, all those receivers were off the board. So
it's true. I look at this Rams team, and we within this division like to poo-poo them and be like, oh, the Rams, they're just Hollywood or whatever. But actually, they're a very well managed team. Even though it looks like they keep getting rid of all these draft picks, the players that they do draft, I think are pretty solid players. They just happen to be further back in the draft. And as we've said a million times on this show, this was the deepest draft in NFL history. It had more players available than any other draft. And so there was a lot to choose from there. I think what's interesting about this Rams team is we had a whole show about whether or not the cap was real. And we had our good friend Miguel come on and to tell us that the cap is real. We still don't quite believe it. But the thing of it is that they manage the business end of their team just as well as they manage it on the football team. And that's what keeps the longevity for them. I think looking at this offseason, the additions that they got through free agency, that made this team better. And I know no one wants to hear that, but I just think it's true. I think the one piece, and this could just be from years of bias from watching him play with Detroit, is I'm still not a huge believer in Matt Stafford. And I'm sorry, Matthew Stafford, he prefers. But I think that he is a good quarterback, even to a great quarterback. He is definitely a top 7 quarterback in the league. I think he's great. But you could even see sometimes that he was a little bit of a weak link for them occasionally. They gave him this huge contract because he deserved it. And I absolutely have no problem with the contract. But if he goes down, then really that is their, anytime your starting quarterback goes down. But I just don't know, even if he's off
they don't have
a few
anything.
games.
They don't have
Yeah,
anything.
it's kind of a disaster. But I'm just saying, even if he's off a few games, that can really hit them, because we saw it a couple of times flare up during the playoffs. So I don't know. Kate, Sonia is not here to defend her Matthew Stafford, whom she loves and adores. But I don't know. I just think that of all of their star players, he's probably the weak link of the star players. And that's, I'll get murdered
I
for
disagree.
that. I know.
mean, if you're talking from a talent standpoint, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I think from a locker room presence, from a veteran mentality, from a football IQ, I got no issue with it. My biggest problem with the Rams is it's a perception thing. I think of St. Louis. I think of Jeff Fisher. I think of all of the expectations when McVay took over that team and them underwhelming, and Goff, and just that whole, my perception of what they've been for the last 5 or 6 years really colors my thoughts about what I'm going to predict them to do this year. I'm stuck there. And I think maybe a lot of people are.
I think that's why I'm stuck on Stafford, is because of all of his years in Detroit. In my mind, we'll switch.
Last year, if you go look at his stats, he was the third-ranked quarterback for most of the year in the NFL. And stats-wise. Touchdown ratio, interception ratio, yards per attempt, all that stuff.
Cooper Kupp is his Calvin Johnson. You're right.
It is. And that's his blanket. And like I said, when you look at McVay and what McVay did, Goff to me, and sorry, you guys, is a Drew Luck. He'll win you a couple games, but he's not going to win the game that he needs to. Where if you got a veteran like Matthew Stafford, he'll see something at the end of that game, and that's going to propel you to the next level. Okay. That's the difference between a franchise quarterback and a quarterback that's just going to be a manager.
Right.
So
agreed. I agree. I don't disagree with that at all. Yeah. So looking at this team, we don't do predictions until the podcast right before the first game of the season. But I'm going to tell you, looking at last year's standings, I don't see a bunch of different things changing this next year. I think they're going to be pretty similar. Bill, please tell everyone about your podcast. It's one of my favorite Seahawks podcasts.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to be on the show. I really enjoyed coming, so I appreciate that. You can find me at NW Seahawk, Northwest Seahawk on Twitter. You can find the show at Hawks Playbook on Twitter. SeahawksPlaybook.com is the website. You can find the show by searching Seahawks Playbook Podcast on any podcast platform and YouTube channel. We've got the YouTube channel as well. I also do another show with Keith as well called Pro Football Playbook. We just started it in November. We cover the entire 32 market NFL markets on that show, and we're just kind of getting that off the ground. We've done, I think we're up to 45 episodes, but nobody knows about it because we just haven't been out there. We're just kind of building the bank and seeing if anybody trickles along and stops. But if you want to find that at Pro Football Playbook Podcast, you can search that. So thanks.
I love it. Awesome. Yeah, Bill and Keith's podcast is fantastic, and Keith Myers is on his podcast with him, his co-host, and it's such a good time. And they invite me over every once in a while, and I enjoy hanging out with them.
And you'll probably be getting an invitation here pretty quick, because I'm going to Europe. Rumored that I'm leaving for a couple of weeks in July, so hopefully you're.
I get the Keith phone call. Hey Dana, you want to go on the coast? I would love it. I love it so much. All right, everyone. Oh my gosh, I forgot to look and see what is next. Is it NFC East next week? I think.
No, that was last week. NFC South.
Last week.
South. It must be South this next week. Yeah, we're rolling through the NFC, everybody. We're getting there. Mm-hmm. All right, everybody. We thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. I'm sorry we went a little long, but it's the NFC West. You knew we would, right? Like
it's the Seahawks. You knew it was.
Yeah.
We
are. Wait till we talk about the Browns division. It's going to go on for an hour for sure.
I'll have Kleenexes for everyone and alcohol.
Same to you, buddy. Be well.
Yeah, we will be back again next week, right here, every Tuesday night on Twitter and on YouTube, 8 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll see you again next week. Good night, everybody. Have a great